you to The Way. Calling our program The Way seems kind of politically incorrect. In fact, calling something truth in our society seems to be out of step with society's view. But truth is at the center of who we are, where we are going, and everyone, in fact, is headed in a particular path, a way, whether consciously or unconsciously. They may not understand what path they're on. They may not even fully understand where they're headed. But nevertheless, everyone is on their way towards the things that they value most in their life. We live in an era in which there are many competing things vying to hold our attention. Sex, money, power. Isn't it amazing that generation after generation, millennia after millennia, people are still pursuing the same things? And yet the more we pursue those things, the more frustrated we find ourselves. John D. Rockefeller was asked at the height of his incredible personal wealth in the oil business, how much is enough? And he said, $1 more than you have. The history of humankind continually illustrates the pursuit of power, sex, or money. Illustrates that it never satisfies. One more dollar, one more conquest, one more country subjugated. It just isn't enough. Blaise Pascal stated it this way: there's a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of each man which cannot be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God the Creator, made known in Christ Jesus. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. No one comes to me will ever be hungry, and no one who believes in me will ever be thirsty again. The way is to be a faithful follower of Jesus Christ. He said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Many of you had to read in high school or college Leo Tolstoy. You probably read War and Peace or Anna Karenina. But he also wrote a book called A Confession. And he described how, as a child, he rejected Christianity. And he started to search for meaning and purpose in his life. At first he thought life is about having a good time. Just make the most of life. Have fun. And he entered into the social whirl of Moscow and St. Petersburg. He drank heavily. He was promiscuous. He led basically a wild life. And he found himself feeling empty. He thought, well, maybe money is the answer. And he inherited a lot of money, and he started to make a lot of money out of his books as well. And he found that money's kind of like seawater. The more you drink of it, the more thirsty you are. Didn't satisfy. He thought, well, maybe fame, importance, success, if I can be really successful. And he wrote what the Encyclopedia Britannica describes as one of the 2 or 3 greatest novels in the history of world literature. But he still wasn't satisfied. Then he thought, well, maybe it's about relationships. Marriage, family life. He married in 1862 and had a very happy family and 13 children, which he said distracted him from his search for the overall meaning of life. He was surrounded by what looked like everyone looking at Tolstoy would say, wow, you've got everything, you've got complete happiness. And he said that one question drove him to the brink of suicide. What meaning has my life that the inevitability of death does not destroy? think, and he thought, well, the philosophers must have an answer, the scientists must have an answer, and he started searching every field of science and philosophy. Why do I live? And the only answer he came up with was, in the infinity of space and the infinity of time, infinitely small particles mutate with infinite complexity. And it gave the kind of satisfaction that that kind of answer always gives. And then he looked at the very poor people, very poor indeed, in his Russia. And he found they were happy because of their faith in Jesus Christ. It's hard to explain just how someone who is looking for love in all the wrong places, as we sing in our songs, without Jesus, there's always that God-shaped vacuum that Blaise Pascal describes in his Pensieve. Jesus is unique. Unique answer for all humanity. He said, I am the truth. Remember when he goes, as he's facing trial on that Friday morning, and he goes before Pilate. You remember that encounter that Jesus had with Pilate? And Pilate has a very modern view. What is truth? And for him, it was exactly what it is for us. Truth is what you make of the world. Your truth, her truth, his truth. Everyone has a different truth. It doesn't really matter. That's the way the world views it. But Jesus said, I am the truth. And he says, everyone who seeks truth listens to me. Those are pretty extraordinary claims. That not only is there an absolute truth, but it can only be found as God reveals himself through Jesus Christ. And as we see and hear the word and then experience him, then we find what is true. And a life lived for Jesus Christ is the only kind of true living that there is. Jesus' statements do not allow for our subjectivism. It doesn't allow us to equate him with other people. There is no equality between Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad and Confucius. In fact, he makes claims that none of the others even try to make. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity says words that I'm sure you've heard before. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. Let us not come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. End quote. Truth in the Hebrew mind is different in some ways, however, than it is in our modern mind. In the Western mind, when we think of truth, we think of these set of statements as being true or untrue. And so we revere people who have a body of knowledge. Having a body knowledge is a wonderful thing. But in the Hebrew world, they haven't fully understand what knowledge is. Because in the Hebrew mind, knowledge is not merely the accumulation of facts, but it is that which is perceived by the mind, experienced in the heart, and given place in people's life and praxis, their experience. Heart, mind, and strength are all a part of what it means to know Him. Jesus said, I am the life. The Gospel of John, the 10th chapter, he says, I am the gate. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief only comes to steal and kill and destroy. I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance. Christ came to win victory at the cross. He conquers death by fully entering into death, overcomes death, conquers Satan by using the very means employed by Satan himself. In fact, using Satan's own plans to thwart him. God entered fully into the bondage of death, turned it inside out by making a moment of victory, and thereby liberates humanity to live lives of love without the fear of death. And He invites us now to live as citizens under His reign. He invites us to the life which He has both won, and that we participate as we are in Him and He is in us. The Christian life is not only knowledge, not only our dogma as the church. And everyone, I think, in this room understands how important it is that we understand rightly what the Christian faith is about in terms of knowledge. But it is also to love the Lord who loves us and to walk in that kind of life with Him in command. When Jesus said, I am the life, He's inviting us to be disciples. In Jesus' day, a disciple was not simply someone who learned at the feet of another. When Paul talks about learning at the feet of Gamaliel, he also followed him in his teachings. That's what disciples did. Whether it was in Jerusalem or whether it was in Athens or wherever it was, a disciple was one who learned from, but also experienced and lived by that culture in which the person they were following lived and taught and experienced. Remember when the Pharisees and the Sadducees are trying to get Jesus to slip up. And one of the Pharisees, who was an expert in the law, said, Teacher, of all the commands in the law, which one's the greatest? Now, I don't know about Robert, but I know for me, I get asked questions and I'm trying to think on the fly about how do you answer this question. Because sometimes questions are tough. And the younger the person who asks them, the tougher the questions. Because we get you tamed after a certain time in the Christian walk. He was trying to trip Jesus, and Jesus goes right to the note, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. Everything else in the law and the prophets is based on these two things. To live the life of Jesus is to walk with Him as He calls us to Himself. Now, going to be doing as we go through these several weeks is participating in not only a catechism. Anybody remember your catechism growing up? Raise your hand if you went through a catechism that you can remember. Okay, because catechisms happen in the Lutheran Church and the Methodist Church and all kinds of denominations. I will almost guarantee you that in your catechism or whatever kind of training class you had, because even if it's not called a catechism, Baptist and Church of Christ all do it, but we tend to focus on what? These are the facts. They're Joe Friday Christians. And everybody under 40 totally do not get that reference. She'll call Dragnet. It was always, I want the facts, just the facts, man. Just the facts. I feel like someone who is so in tune with the facts that that's a central part of their life. They're that Romans chapter 7 Christian. They know exactly what they should be doing. I bet you most of you remember the greatest mistakes you made in your walk with Christ over the years, whatever age, and you knew exactly what you should have done. If you've ever done something with the full knowledge that it was wrong and did it anyway, raise your hand. Okay? It's not that we don't necessarily know what to do. Knowledge is important, and sometimes we don't bring enough knowledge to the table. It's that we have put other priorities. We don't love Jesus enough to say it's important enough to me. Or we try to do it on our own rather than walking by His Spirit. And this is especially true as we try to live the Christian life as independent Christians. In fact, if I have one knock against Protestantism, and I am a Protestant, it is the very fact that we have separated ourselves from the church as being important. Now, sometimes we think in those terms and we remember, we remember the guy who said, I would have been at church Sunday, but I find I can worship God just as well in my boat on the lake as I'm fishing. Right? You probably know someone then. If you've ever been a pastor, you do know someone who has made those kind of excuses, and I'll call them what they are. Because one thing that I'm pretty sure about most of those situations, and I won't say all of them, they're more concerned about catching fish than they are worshiping God that day. I'm not saying you can't do both, but women can't multitask and men don't even claim to. Okay? Humanity is not really good at multitasking. We are like the CPU of a computer in which no matter how fast we can switch jobs, we're kind of doing one thing at a time. At least an older. Now here's the thing. If you think about how a child grows, I bet you every single one of you would say having parents, having an environment in which people love them, encourage them, lead them in the right direction is important, right? How many think that people do not really need parents, don't really need to have an environment that's positive? Here's the thing. One of the cruel experiments conducted by the Nazi regime in the middle of the last century was exactly those kinds of things. How will children fare? We were not made to be independent of one another. as adults we need it as children. Everybody needs to be in community. We live in an age in which we have an extremely high suicide rate. It's related to having the fewest number of friends we've ever had in the history of our nation. And what we find is that as things fall apart, we're isolated more and more with more and more people around us who we have no real depth of relationship with. The church was never meant for that because humanity was never meant for that. So one of the things that I want us to understand is how important it is that we recognize that the facts are not enough. And even trying to follow Jesus on our own is not enough. That when Jesus comes into our life, so do his family. I have never told a young man or a young woman that I was in marital counseling with that they didn't have to worry about their in-laws because they would never have any impact on their life. It is not in the Bible, but it is true that when you marry someone, you marry their family. For all the good, for all the quirkiness. Even my family has some quirkiness. I'm the only non-quirky person in my entire family. Look, think about it. We all we all can sit at the table, just our nuclear family. So my daughters, my son, Kathy and I are together at the table, and we can bring up with big smiles on our faces and hearty laughs the most idiotic thing that any one of us have done in our family. And we have a rich heritage of unique experiences in which we took turns playing the fool. Right? And we also have plenty of experiences of moments of greatness. If you think about it in your family, there are moments of greatness. Even your youngest children have moments of greatness. Besides, once you're a grandchild, all you have to do is look cute and burp, and it's a wonderful and great thing for the grandparent. Look, healthy families, and I think I've said this once in a sermon already here. 1947, Timberlawn Hospital in East Dallas, they did a study of what makes a healthy, functional family. And I first heard about this 40 years later, in the late 80s, about 89. But I've always been impressed by what the study clearly showed. In healthy families, they had a good understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. In dysfunctional families, and I didn't know how true it was until I'd been a minister for a while, there is a cover-up of the dysfunctionality. And so there is a lack of appreciation both of their strengths and a lack of appreciation of their weaknesses. You see, when we're called in Christian love to be family, and that's what the church really is called to be, not just throw out the term church family, but to really be that, we recognize the strengths and weaknesses of each other. And we let grace grease the skids. Not a single one of us can go through an entire day without needing grace in moments of that day. No matter how circumspect we are, no matter how proper we are, no matter how hard we try, no matter what list of rules we go go by in our interactions. We're still going to tick each other off, make each other sad, encourage each other to sin. I wish I could say otherwise. That's what a healthy family does. But they do not leave their weaknesses unchallenged. You see, our children, it's easy, as our children are little, we recognize they're going to do something today. You wake up with a 2-year-old in your house. They are going to do something today that you don't want them to do. Yes? The 32-year-old spouse at your house is going to do something today that's going to tick you off and disappoint you. But you don't leave it there. Love does not mean, as, forgive me, the worst movie ever made in the history of Hollywood says, love does not mean having to say you're sorry. Never having to say you're sorry. That's the most ludicrous throwaway line. If that's your favorite movie, just contact me. We need to have counseling. Love is a recognition that I need to say, I screwed up. I'm sorry. Believe it or not, I've had to say that to Kathy at least 4 or 5 times in the last few decades. Right? Anybody here not screw up with your spouse or your child or your parent or your friends? The church grasps God's will, and it seeks, by the grace of God, to walk with each other there. You know, when Scripture says that a strand of 3 is not easily broken, right? You're amazed at how much more strength you have. It's not 3 times. It's much more than you get this strength from being unified, being together, being whole. This is true. We can see it in our philosophically. We can see it in our politics. We know that in nations that are strong and united, it's hard to overcome them, isn't it? Nations that are not are kind of like the Iraqi army that quickly fell apart because everybody went their own direction. Now, why am I off on the church? Because I think that in the Protestant world, we have gone to the extreme of seeing that the faith is something that's given to me. It's me and God. And I don't want you to lose the relationship personal between you and God. But it's never enough, is it? In fact, John keeps harping at us, not only in his gospel, but in his letters, and he says, if you don't love God, you don't love your neighbor. If you don't love your neighbor, you don't love God. I know I just quoted an old country piece, but nevertheless, it's true. The church must be more than a group of acquaintances. It is easy for us to be a group of acquaintances. It is hard for us to share our life deeply. One of the biggest hurdles we have to do is to get over the "how are you doing" question. Every single one of us knows the proper response to "how are you doing." Can you tell me the one-word answer? Fine. Because if you're not, I don't want to hear it. Don't you be telling me about your problems. I didn't ask you how you were doing for you to share your problems. I didn't ask you to tell me about your struggles. And I certainly didn't ask you to tell me about your victories that I haven't had. Now, if I seem to be harping on it too much, what I find in the church is we are too often comfortable with hearing the answer, fine. When my son and my daughters, when I ask how they were doing and they go, fine, I didn't let them stop there. Kathy didn't let them stop there. It irritated the bejabbers out of my kids that we didn't stop there. Why didn't we stop there? You are allowed to participate. Why didn't we stop there?
Because you love them. You want to know how their day went, what they did.
When people tell me fine in my family, the one thing I can be pretty sure about is it's not. And I also know that what is underlying that in someone that I have a real relationship is a pain that they can't express easily. I am not telling you to get in everybody's business. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is to invest in each other's lives. We have seen over the past 30 or 40 years a change that we can describe in the church. If I were to go back to the 1960s, there were very few churches of 2,000. Right? Most churches had a much smaller number. The reality is, do you know what the average attendance at churches are?
85?
Nope. 85 is in the top quarter.
Oh.
Are we talking percentage? Like numbers?
I'm talking about if you look at this average size church, you're talking something around 50. We think today First Methodist, First Baptist, and Central Baptist, right? Those are the terms we think of. So we can describe that there's been this change in scale in largest churches. And that would be a true thing. The big steeple churches had many less than what they do now, simply because the technology allows us to have more people in a room. I am, however, struck by a few things, and this will bring me back to the other side of it. I am struck, having attended a couple of those large churches, and just being in the facility and having a direct view of the speaker and watching how many people with the speaker right in clear view, like I'm looking at Woody now, and they still look up at the monitor. I have no idea why that is, but it's a reality. I also will tell you the same kind of phenomenon is that many churches today have now multiple campuses in which you go to a campus, they'll have their own music, but then they will show a video sermon. Now, I have to tell you, I'm not a big fan of that. I can't say there's anything directly in Scripture against it, except I would suggest that as we pull away the speaker from the congregation, we are simply encouraging the focus to be on the message and not on the relationship. If Jesus were to come today, I still think he would go where people are and meet them person to person. I believe in the power of God that works in incredible ways, but I don't think Jesus would ever say, now I want you to put your hand on the television set. Jesus spit in the mud and touched the blind man's eyes. He took hold of the leper. These are acts of physical contact that are based out of the need for physical contact and love and intimacy that needs to be part of the church. Now, we can beat up the megachurches because we're not one. I always love preachers whose sermons are always about the sins of those other people. So we talk about, you know how those Baptists are. Aren't you glad you're not like them? Or the Methodists, or the Episcopalians, or whoever it is. I've never seen the reason to do that. They're not in the room. God called on me to step all over Lonnie's toes. I mean, God steps on my toes in my own sermons. I don't think that's quite fair. Because the Word of God is direct and it touches people's lives where they are. The problem is, for even churches of our size, is that we've gone along with our society and we have reduced our relationships one with another. We're not the same as we were 100 years ago. Now, admit it, there were some actual benefits to being in a rural society where people depended totally on one another, right? You built relationships that when you went to your neighbor to get a cup of sugar, it's because there was no 7-Eleven to go to get a cup of sugar. And if it was on a Sunday, it doesn't matter if there was a store next door or not. They weren't going to be open. I've always been impressed, and we lived in fact, Kathy taught in a school district that had a large number of people from a town called Grays Prairie in East Texas, a large Mennonite community. Now, hear me carefully. It always impressed me that there was nothing that could go wrong in someone's family, that there wasn't a community there to help them pick up the pieces, rebuild, and go forward. It is not enough for us to say in 2019 that they have insurance for that. Or there's other services to help. Because it's not necessarily primarily about the physical loss in assets. People whose house burned down, even if insurance paid 100% of their loss, they've taken a loss that can't beat simply taken by giving them money to buy all stuff new. What happens when someone loses their grandmother's wedding dress? Or the only photo someone may have of their dad or granddad? You see, it's about losses in terms of the deep personal loss people have. The number one problem small churches have in 2019 is the same problem that the mega churches has. And that is, we've been willing to accept less than a full commitment as the family of God and invest in each other's lives. And I would suggest if we have failed, when we fail to do that, no matter who we are, we've also failed to fully be invested in Jesus. So, here's the thing. It is not simply about what we're going to be talking about, which really is catechesis in a way, but it's also about our time together to be able to discuss how do we take what we know and live it individually and as a community. And so I'm going to ask you to take part in a small group. I will give you leading questions. There are only a few. And I'm going to give you the ground rules because I know how small groups work and don't work. First of all, don't dominate the conversation. And second of all, don't neglect to take part in the conversation. I'm not telling you to talk too much or talk too little, but to allow everyone to give voice to how do we do these things that God is calling us to. I'm going to ask you to find someone in your group to be the facilitator. The facilitator doesn't get out of talking, nor do they talk more than anybody else. They just make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate and that you go through, and most importantly, that at 7:40, you head towards the nave. I ask that if it's all right, you can use this room and just take a folding chair in with you, and you can use this back room that Woody so generously cleaned for us last week. The back room towards the back door. I'm going to give you a sheet that has some guiding questions. Don't feel like you're totally bound by them. There are two things, though. It is not time for a television talk show. We're not looking for shared ignorance. So what we're looking at is, how do we take God's Word and live it? And secondly, we listen to each other and really listen. And don't spend a lot of time trying to correct what they said, but rather hear it, but also interact with it. Questions about what we're doing before I hand out the guiding question sheets. Well, we are going to separate boys in one room, girls in another. And I will let you choose which place to go. The girls will go there. We're not going to take 15 minutes to decide. The girls go in there. I'll help bring chairs in.